because a driving force for this is that people also want to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions. And this was a way potentially of sequestering carbon. So I would say in 2008 is when I really started getting into climate change. And I was saying about 2 years later, I started working more in the politics of climate change.
Well, it's funny, your story kind of parallels mine. I always looked at climate change from a political lens. I'd heard of the Kyoto Protocol, certainly was an expert on it. And by the way, I'm just a layperson. I don't have any real background in climate change other than the enormous amounts of time I spend on Twitter and reading articles and learning as much as I can about the topic. But anyway, so yeah, I'd heard about the Kyoto Protocol, and I think probably the next big event was Al Gore's movie. So I'd seen that, and then I remember hearing about the East Anglia um, break-in, or they hacked the emails, and I didn't know what to make of that. I didn't follow that very closely. But then around 2013, I started wondering. I'm not hearing anything about climate change. Is it real? Is it not real? I mean, no one's talking about it. And so exactly like you, I started looking into what was going on, and that's how I kind of really fell into it and got kind of sucked in. We'll talk about that more and some of the work I did around that. But all right. So, and when did you first come to Twitter?
I had a Twitter account from about 2010. And as case of many people from my generation, as their kids that got them into it. And so I normally was just using it to promote my consultancy at the time. And it was okay. I had a couple of thousand followers or something. I wasn't doing too bad for an old guy that didn't know what he was doing on Twitter.
Yeah, it was good.
But then my focus went more and more to climate change. Because once on Twitter, I just saw all this garbage that was coming out.
So what year was that about?
Pardon me?
What year was that about when you started doing the Twitter climate change stuff?
I actually went back to look to see when was the first time I actually used the word climate denier. On Twitter, it was in 2015. When I written my climate politics book, it wasn't in my agenda at the time. I talk about climate skeptics in the book. Now, I never would use that term. Climate skeptics does not describe what they were. Right. They are climate deniers.
Right.
And so in 2015 is when I started going after the climate deniers. And I started the way most people do. They would show up some stupid graph or make some stupid comment. And so I give them a report from the peer-reviewed literature or the IPCC or NASA or NOAA to show that they were wrong.
Right.
And that's a standard sort of approach, right? But you know what happens when you do that.
Right.
You prove them they're wrong, and they don't care.
Right.
They just go off and, well, here's another thing that proves you're wrong. Right. Well, here's another proof of real science that shows you're wrong. Well, I don't care again, and here's another one. So you get in that endless loop.
Right.
Yeah, it goes on for eternity.
Yeah, I mean, were you like me? Like, I was really naive. I thought, everyone wants to know the truth. They want to know the facts, and they want to have a healthy debate about things. So that's how, what my approach first was on Twitter. It's just like you. Oh, if I show them this or show them that, and I wasn't even that sure in the very early stages about climate change. So, I thought we would have discussions. But I just keep seeing all this kind of crazy people who obviously had no interest in really learning anything. They had made up their minds and they were convinced that it was a big hoax or, whatever nonsense they came up with. So, I mean, did you go through the same process? Did you try to have genuine debates, or was it just immediately apparent to you that it was hopeless?
Oh, for years.
Yeah.
I think for the first 3 or 4 years, I was trying to debate them with facts, and truly trying to stay with the peer-reviewed literature. I then started a series saying, I forget the exact wording, but it was essentially is that science is not opinion, it's based on fact. And science is based on science. And science says so and so. And I was using scientific organizations. So using that sort of as a banner. But that was just got me in the same loop that I had before.
Right.
I'll tell you how I got in the climate book. And I remember this just like it was yesterday. It was in early 2019. I was in a debate with on Twitter. Everything's Twitter in my life on this, with Scott Adams. And Scott
The
Adams
Dilbert
is the
cartoonist, yeah.
creator of Dilbert.
Nut.
And I
It's a
love
nut.
that cartoon, by the way. It's
No,
one
it's
of
a
the
good
funniest things I've
cartoon,
ever
yeah.
seen.
Right.
But Scott Adams is a climate denier. And
Yeah.
he's one of these subtle ones that it's not till you are in a long discussion with him that you realize where this conversation is headed. He actually does it very well. We got into it one weekend. And it's one thing dealing with the climate denier, but they all have their horde of troll followers.
Right.
And they have them well trained. You know, when you get into these high profile climate deniers, like the real high profile ones, you say boo, and 50 of them just jump all over you with the stupidest things you've ever heard of in your life.
Right.
But I was answering all of them. And then that Twitter engagement with Scott Adams and mostly his followers, I think we had 150,000 engagements over the weekend.
Wow.
I can tell you, I was exhausted. And you say, how can you be exhausted over Twitter? You dumb, you know, why didn't you just stop? It's addictive. You know, you almost can't stop. And I saw the odd person that would make a comment. And there was people out there that wanted to help, but I had no way of contacting them.
I'm sorry, you didn't have contact with him, you said?
No, I have no way of contacting them.
Oh, gotcha. Yeah. Oh, I see.
Twitter.
Right. Yeah.
And so I left it for, several months. And then
So you completely got off Twitter for 2 months?
No, I was staying on Twitter and I kept on with the engagements, and it wasn't getting any better. I was getting frustrated. So I said, well, I'm going to form a hashtag. I barely knew what a hashtag was, by the way. I had no idea it would do anything. And the whole purpose was that hashtag. And someone coined this phrase for me. I like it. It's sort of the bat signal to handle climate deniers and you're looking for help or for people who want to join. And so I just said, hey, I've just been attacked by a swarm of climate deniers and their followers. If you guys want to join in and help, use the hashtag climate brawl. It took off, not because I was a genius or something. People wanted it.
I remember seeing that. I mean, I don't remember where I was or anything, but I remember the thought going through my head like, yeah, finally someone gets it. If you coordinate people, you can beat back these idiots. If it's simple solidarity, and we all know what that is. If people band together and they push back against the bullies, then you got a much better chance of winning. So when I saw that, and after all my years of frustration, I got on Twitter in 2013, but really got active maybe about 2015. But yeah, I mean, I thought that was phenomenal because that was the first time I had really seen someone try to leverage Twitter to push back against the bullies like that. So I was extremely happy when I saw that.
Well, and that was the whole idea. One person, it doesn't matter what you're discussing on Twitter. It's always easy to demonstrate lies than it is to defend the truth. It takes so much longer to defend the truth. So people don't realize it, that when you're defending the truth on anything, you're always at a disadvantage versus the liars that are out there.
Correct.
Especially if you're talking about something that it's rapid machine gun fire. Whether you're in a public debate or you're in a social media debate, it takes time. And again, strangely enough, the advantage lies to begin with anyway, with the person promoting the lies.
So have you ever converted a denier? Have you ever been able to knock sense into anyone? I mean, or even move anyone in any way? And if not, why still do it?
Well, I have over 130,000 tweets right now. And I'm not sure what the percentage is, but I would guess 80 to 90% of them.
And you got about 50,000 followers, I think, right?
I'm a lot.
I think you got about 50,000, yeah.
And the followers now are 52,000. That took a long time. And we can talk about that later on, how it got to that level. It was quite interesting. But the The amount of tweets about dealing with climate nihilism was about 80 to 90% of that 130,000. Of that, I know I've converted one person for sure. There's a chance
wow.
at two.
Oh, really?
That's not a very good hitting record. I'm going to have to go another 130,000 to get another one.
Well, that's an infinite number of times better than me.
But in fairness, now anyway, and it's probably been true for the last couple of years, there is no climate denier that we see on Twitter that wants to be converted, that will be converted. We're all frustrated by that. But I'm not trying to convert climate deniers. I haven't been trying to convert climate deniers for years. What I am trying to do is influence their followers and others on Twitter, because they're the ones to respond.
Right, exactly.
And those who follow me on Twitter will see a couple of tweets I use time and time again.
It's the people in the middle that see the brawl and see the back and forth, and they can decide. Is that basically what you're saying?
That, and also not being taken in by the propaganda of the climate deniers. So it's two things: trying to get them away from their support and making sure they don't get more support. And
right.
There's an old adage: don't feed the trolls.
Right. And I never paid much attention to that. Right. Yeah.
Okay, that's not right. And actually, the scientific literature that's looked into this, they don't support that either. Propaganda repeated again and again becomes the truth in people's minds if it's not challenged. That's the power of propaganda. So that's a major driving force for me to challenge the propaganda from the climate deniers. And at the same time, silence is what most people are. That's what the vast number of people are silent, is an enabler of propaganda.
Right. Yeah.
And so the last thing I am now is silent, and I don't want to overly attack them, be on a Twitter feed with them for days on end, because it does enhance them too much. I like it to be short and sweet. I don't mind being in a half dozen replies with them before cutting the conversation off.
And so you said you got on around 2013 and into the climate change stuff around 2015. I mean, I've got my own opinions on whether things are going good or bad on Twitter since then, but I'd love to hear, have you seen an overall decline in deniers? Have you seen more people actively combating the deniers over that time? I mean, do you think we're moving in the right direction in that regard?
Well, the one thing about Twitter, we're all biased by seeing the section of Twitter that we are involved in, because we really don't follow all of Twitter.
Right.
But the one thing I can tell you, in my part of Twitter, whatever that means, I'm not even quite sure what that means. Since Climate Brawl has come out, the world has changed dramatically. The Twitterverse has changed dramatically. No longer is it one poor sucker out there trying to defend science and all these people jumping all over them and attacking them nonstop. It's exhausting when that happens, by the way. And so what happens now is it's usually the opposite. I go after a high-profile climate denier. I'm never doing that alone. And what happens now, if anyone else comes in, there's 4 or 5 friends of Climate Brawl to jump in at the same time as well.
Right. I've seen the deniers kind of reverse jujitsu that, though. They will put up a Climate Brawl tag. I mean, has that been a problem? Well, they'll kind of try to hijack the hashtag?
It was worse earlier on. Even the Heartland Institute started using it
oh, really?
It was a year or two ago.
Are you shitting me? Holy cow.
And they're a joke,
These guys are
but, and there's a couple out there, but most people, you can tell pretty quickly if they're playing a game with Climate Brawl. Yeah. I would say 90%, 95% these days are legit. It may even be closer to 100.
Gotcha.
But what happens is the Twitterverse has become very quiet in climate denial. Like they're still out there.
Yeah.
But there's a handful of horrible tweeters who just blabber on every day. But that's it. There's no one else in there. There's no more pretending that they have science. That they just want to insult me, which I get dozens upon dozens of times per day. They're trying to pass accusations. They love quote mining. taking some tweet and part of it that was sent out 2.5 years ago and said, look what this stupid idiot said back then.
Right.
But, so to directly answer your question, yeah, Twitterverse has changed a lot and much for the better. There's still work to be done.
I agree, yeah.
But even if you look at the studies that are done by Yale Climate Communications, where they're following what climate denialism is generally, climate denialism is declining. There's still a lot out there, but it's headed in the right direction. It's far past its peak. Now, especially in your home country, it's worse, especially in the political situation, what's going on. But even among Republicans, you got to remember the GOP doesn't stand for the grand old party. It stands for the gas and oil party. Okay, remember that.
Yeah.
These guys are very slowly giving in. It's not even where close to fast enough as President Biden is seeing right now. But yeah, there's definitely a positive change out there.
That's awesome. That's good to hear. I mean, I felt a lot of despair, when I first got into this stuff. I would just wonder, why is no one else trying to call out these guys as bullshit? Why are they just getting away with it? Where are the climate scientists fighting it? And, I came to learn that I think a lot of the climate scientists did originally try to combat the deniers themselves. It'd be like the Gavin Schmitz and, Michael Mann. I think eventually they just realized it was a lost cause. I don't know that for sure. I'm kind of speculating there. But I think, all the early heavy hitters in the Twitter debates kind of just abandoned it because it was just a total waste of time. And these guys obviously have more important stuff to do, unlike me and you, where we got a lot of time to spend on this. But I've definitely seen a huge change, especially with more scientists getting involved. I think they've put on a concerted effort to really do more to get good information out. And that has really heartened me a great deal. Catherine Hayhoe, she's phenomenal. Michael Mann, of course, that guy's nonstop. I mean, I think, much better than where we were, 6-7 years ago for sure. So I definitely agree with it.
Yeah, very much so. And Dr. Mann and Dr. Hayhoe are both veterans of the Twitter trenches, besides in their real careers as well. When I wrote the Carbon Politics book and the failure of the Kyoto Protocol, there was a large section on Dr. Mann on how he was persecuted and prosecuted.
Right.
You mentioned the horrible situation of what became known as ClimateGate, which was just a giant conspiracy theory and was driven by an illegal hacking of the emails. What he went through.
For those who don't know, this is back in 2010, the East Anglia.
Yeah. There were attempts to bring criminal charges against him.
Right.
But by high profile politicians, it was just disgraceful that this occurred in the leading democracy of the world. It was just atrocious.
Yeah, well, I'm very indebted to Michael Mann for his book, Climate War. Was it Hockey Stick and the Climate Wars? And that was a real eye opener for me. And it's unbelievable how dirty and how much politics got involved in trying to undermine him. It's unreal, really, is what it is. I mean, that we live in a day and age where greed has basically run amok and is doing everything it can to hold on to, its profits. I mean, I just never realized how bad things were really until I read that book, I don't think.
Well, my new book, Climate Brawl, The Politics of the Climate Crisis, 80% of the book is on what's happening in US politics, both in the White House and in Congress. And until I really looked this in detail, you'd be amazed at what goes on, especially in the halls of Congress. It's actually unbelievable. And it's been going on for a couple of decades, and it's continuing right today.
Yeah, and it's only getting worse. I mean, we can talk all day about Trump and the Republican Party today. And it's frightening what is happening. And I'm at a loss. I mean, just when things seem to be getting good, as far as, public opinion and climate debate. Now we've got to worry about the Republican Party, getting back in power and just ending any of the gains that we might be able to make here in the next 4 years. And it's absolutely critical, um, that they don't get that power back, or we are really, really screwed. I mean, it's really frightening. And that kind of brings up another question I wanted to ask you. So climate change is like a huge psychological weight, for anybody to just sit down and think about it and think about the possibility of, we're wrecking the ecology of the planet, and sea levels are going to rise, 20 feet over the next, 100, 200 years. And, it might lead to endless wars and who knows what. I mean, you don't want to think about it. So was there a period in your life where you did shut it out a little bit, or did you just, I mean, what made you come to terms with this pending and looming disaster?
Well,
How did you process it?
I've never backed down. And I guess I was fortunate enough that in the last few years, I've seen progress being made. And just by the nature of this, my actions in the Twitterverse, I probably see more of this than most people do. And most people may not have noticed. I've always been hopeful. And frankly, you have no choice.
Exactly
There's
right.
a misconception of what's going on here. Every second we waste, things are going to get worse. But let's say we're really stupid and we don't do anything for the next decade. It's not that you can say, oh, well, we've reached this new level of a horrible situation, we're just going to have to live with it. No, it's going to keep on getting worse.
Right,
So first of all,
absolutely.
it makes no sense to me. It's not logical because of the nature of the beast to ever say, oh, well, we should give up on it and just accept it. Now, that
Right.
said, it's imperative that we don't let it get a lot worse. Just like at COP26, which the message was very clear, the messages from the IPCC, whether from Greta Thunberg or Michael Mann or whoever,
Are you following
we
this?
have to take action now.
Are you following COP26 pretty closely?
Yeah, especially through the excellent reporting of The Guardian. It's a great media outlet for following the climate crisis, and I thought they did a very good job on COP.
So let's talk about COP a little bit, because I really don't know that much about it. I mean, I know the UN created this committees of the people, not the people. What is it? Public?
Well, when you look at the COP
But
process,
what does COP stand for? Committee of the
the Conference of the Parties.
Conference of the Parties. That's it. Yeah, just a
And
very bland
what it
name. Yeah.
is, we have to go back. There's a whole pile of COPs, by the way, not just on climate change. The UN this is the standard UN procedure for handling international treaties. So when the UN sets up and has it, doesn't matter what it is. And there's not a lot of them, but when there's an international treaty set up through the UN, first they agree to the treaty, and then the COP process takes over. And Conference of the Parties is not something that we're used to. It's essentially a meeting of world leaders, because all the world leaders are part of the UN, to make modifications to these treaties, get commitments as it goes along.
Gotcha. So the treaty's already signed. I think the last one would be the Paris Treaty. Is that correct?
No, well, actually, the treaty is actually from the Rio Conference. And the United Nations.
I'm sorry, say that one more time. It's from the Real Conference?
Rio,
Oh, Real, yes. Yep.
de Janeiro.
Yep, gotcha.
And so after that treaty was signed in, what was it, 92, I forget when it is, then the COP process took in.
Gotcha.
And the treaty, the UNFCCC, is the actual treaty. The COP processes are essentially amendments to that treaty.
Gotcha, I see.
And
Very
when it came
interesting.
to Kyoto, that was in 1997.
Yeah, what was
that
Kyoto in
later-
relation to the COP conference?
Anytime you hear about Kyoto or Paris, it just
Yep.
so happens to be the city where the COP meeting was held. And so
Gotcha.
it just so happened that this one was held in Kyoto in Japan.
I see.
And that's where the world agreed that they were going to try to reduce their emissions. And that's where the kerfuffle happened, where the US never, even though they signed Kyoto, it was never ratified.
Right.
And that's where people get confused about the COP process and what the UN is doing. The UN doesn't make any rules. The UN cannot pass some international edict that all countries follow.
Mm.
What happens at a COP process, whether it's Kyoto or it's Glasgow, is that they try to nudge the world forward to do what a lot of people think is right. That's all they're doing. It's a nudge.
Mm-hmm.
To nudge the world leaders is an astronomically difficult thing to do.
Yeah.
So when they showed up at Glasgow,
yeah,
all they could do is say, you should, and this is why.
Yeah.
So then we have the COP meeting, and you'll see the world leaders will say, yes, I will sign off on Paris, or I will agree to these new higher net zero by 2050, or wherever the case may be. But that is not the UN speaking. The UN doesn't, when the COP meeting is over, the only important thing is when those world leaders go back home. And we'll take the case of President Biden. President Biden will come back, is back from Glasgow now. There was no new deal signed, but we can go back to Paris, for example. The Paris deal was signed for the United States. But I want to get sidetracked for a minute. This is where we run into a real problem of what's happening in the US. You'll have a Democratic president that says, oh, I want to do all these great things, and he tries his best. And then you'll have the Republican guy come in. It doesn't matter if it's Donald Trump, whoever it is, saying,
Bush.
I don't like any of this stuff, I'm getting rid of it.
Right.
But that's the problem of that's the inner problem of what's happening. The president is not supposed to be passing laws. The president can do his presidential orders, wherever they call it, and it's well-meaning stuff like that. But bills are passed by Congress and only by Congress. I bet you most people don't know how many bills on climate change have been passed by Congress.
I would guess 0. Is that right?
0.
Yeah.
The houses were passed the odd one. The Senate may have passed one or not, or something, but the full Congress has never passed legislation on climate change.
So
we say, well, how are any laws ever set in the United States that there's no law to base on?
So
what it reverts back to is the Clean Air Act from Richard Nixon. And because of the earlier Supreme Court decision that the EPA had to regulate greenhouse gas emissions under the Clean Air Act, that is the only powerful legislation that exists to deal with. And now, as you've probably seen with the new, more right-wing Supreme Court, they're going to relook at that decision.
Yeah. No, that
and
was
if they
frightening.
reverse that, there is no legislation in the U.S.
That is unreal. Yeah, I heard about that. You know, and I read these stories. I just don't know what to make of them. You know, I don't know enough if it's in real. You know, because sometimes you read these headlines, and they're scary sounding, but you know, maybe they're just kind of overblowing the situation. But this one particularly grabbed my attention. So it basically seems like the Supreme Court would rip away the EPA's ability to regulate carbon dioxide. Is that basically right?
That's it exactly.
Yeah, that's unreal. And so that would take away the president's executive power to regulate it under the EPA. Is that basically it?
I'm not quite sure how, certainly by the EPA, but for example, when Barack Obama started all his initiatives.
Well, let me ask you a question that might clear that up. So we signed the Paris Treaty, right? Or the president did. That was never ratified by Congress, right? Am I right on that?
No, I don't believe it was.
Okay. So it sounds like it went into effect as a result of the president's signature. And maybe that's because
why another president could get rid of it.
Right. Yeah. No, it's unreal.
Now, it doesn't mean that laws can't be changed, but laws are much more difficult to change when they've been passed by Congress. And that's why it's so important. I think Mr. Biden is trying to do a lot of good things. And he already has done some, and he's probably going to do more. But if Congress does not ever act on this, I cannot see the US ever coming to grips properly with this. And it doesn't help anybody. It doesn't help business. It doesn't help the public. If there's just a flip-flop every time there's a change of presidents.
Right. And the big worry, I would assume, is if the U.S. doesn't lead, other countries will just say, well, the U.S. isn't doing anything. Why should we have to pick up their slack, you know? Is that essentially, the biggest danger of the U.S. not following through on their past promises and commitments?
Well, yeah, the biggest one in my mind is you're absolutely correct. The US is the largest accumulated producer of greenhouse gases in world history. By far, is far
Right.
ahead of China.
Right.
It just so happens that now China has surpassed them on an annual basis,
Right.
but the US is still the second largest. But you're talking about a country that presents itself and is respected as the leading economic power in the world. They're supposed to be the greatest promoter of democracy in the world. And then you're talking about most of the world that is fighting to survive on an economic basis. And if the US is not prepared to lead on an issue that affects all countries immensely, of which the US has a huge responsibility associated with, you can't blame a lot of them to be very cynical about the whole process.
Right.
Now, at the same time, you have to be careful. Countries decide what they want to do. And it's a little bit of an excuse when we say, well, it's the other guy's fault. In Canada, for example, we get, well, why are we doing anything about climate change for? It won't make any difference if we eliminated every one of our emissions. Look at China. It's all China's fault. Why don't I go over to China and convince them to do it?
Right. I was just arguing with someone about that the other week, pointing out with China, all they have to say is, well, the United States has emitted 50% of all CO2. I think it's around 50% over time, over the history of, modern civilization. And, they've got a fair argument to say, we've only put up, 15 or 20% or whatever the number is. And so the United States is much more responsible for this problem than we are. And why should we have to slow or spend all this money converting over our grid when the United States is responsible? They'll just throw that right back in our face.
Well, the other thing too is on a per capita basis, which really GHG emissions are better normalized to per person. That China is still at half the level of what the United States is. And I remember when I was writing my book, and China was taking a hard line in Kyoto during the negotiations in '97. And there's a line that the Chinese delegate put forward that always stuck with me. The Chinese delegate was talking to the EU and the United States. And when referencing to China, he says, we have survival emissions. You have luxury emissions. And that always stuck with me. And there's a lot of truth to that. It's still true today. It's not the same. Like people are criticizing India right now for, this is a country that has done a great job improving their economy, but they have such a long way to go up what Western Europe and North America has right now. And so we have to be careful that we're not unduly punishing them for a problem that really started with us.
Right. Now, I guess in all fairness, so no one was really aware until maybe the early 80s that this was a very real problem. And then maybe in 88, really became a political thing when Jim Hansen went to Congress and talked about it. And Congress was made aware. So, does that play a factor in the negotiations? Does the United States say, look, we didn't know, Do they try to negotiate with that chip,
Well, until the 1980s, I don't think many people were thinking it was malicious.
Mm-hmm.
There wasn't some evil intent to frig up the world like it is right now. The science of climate change started coming out in the 1950s. And as you pointed out, by the time we got to the later 1980s, near the end of the Reagan administration, the consensus was there.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And the consensus only got stronger since within scientific circles. Political circles, yeah, you can forget about that. but within scientific circles, the consensus was there. And the problem that you ran into is that again, going back to Kyoto, there was a strong push saying that the US owes the rest of the world billions, trillions of dollars for the destruction it has caused. And a country like China was one of the ones who had a big influence on the third world countries to saying, that's not going to help us out. No, we don't want to do that. So there really wasn't an intent to criminalize at that time. The real criminal effect happened after the late 1980s, when the fossil fuel industry started a giant propaganda campaign, first against Kyoto. And it was just filled with lies and propaganda, and they knew it was lies and propaganda. Big oil had a choice. They either had lots of time, there was no rush for this. They either had to make long-term plans to get out of oil and gas and into renewables if they wanted to stay in the energy world, or to fight back dirty. They decided to fight back dirty, and big oil came out with the big lie. And it continues to this day, and it's just atrocious. And that's why we have climate denialism today.
Yeah, but they've changed their tune a little bit. I think, at some point, maybe it was in the early 2000s, late 1990s, they had a softer approach. And my understanding is, and please correct me if I'm wrong, they basically went underground and started funding things like the Heritage Foundation, so they would not combat it directly and publicly. They would never come out and say climate change is a hoax, because I think they know they would be responsible if they were lying about it. So they changed their tune at some point and went more underground. And, in a way, it's really more insidious,
Well, very much so. Yeah, you're describing it perfectly. And they were more or less direct in the 80s, going into the 90s. And certainly when we hit the presidency of George W. Bush, then it was mostly done through the trade associations and by institutions like the Heartland Institute and the Heritage Institute. Heartland became one of the worst ones of the ones over time and still going strong. But in fairness, they were all funded. We call these groups think tanks. Well, what think tanks are generally a bunch of smart people that you can buy anything you want from. And so, in fairness, that happens a lot. So petroleum industry says, okay, I'll give you $10 million. You give it the best shot to show that climate change science is a load of crap. And they say, okay, I'll take your $10 million and I'll do my best to show it's a load of crap.
Yeah. And again, it's unbelievable how twisted and greedy and evil people are. And that's just one of the things that mystifies me, is how the F is this happening? Why are people like this? I mean, do you have any insights as to how the world got so screwed up like this? Or maybe it was always this screwed up and wasn't just as well known. But I think things are just getting much worse. I don't know. I mean, do you have any thoughts on how to even begin to stop these people, and what might?
A good part of my new book on climate for all, the politics of the climate crisis. Again, I'm mostly dealing with the US situation. And why is there so much climate deniers that are in the US? Why? You only got two political parties, and one of them are hard-lying climate deniers. How does that happen? It's almost 50% of your population is in climate denial. There's not 150. You don't have half your population that's evil. You don't have half your population that's stupid. How does this happen? There's two reasons for this. Ideology has a lot to do with it. And the US is famous for small government. And so for people that support small government, that support capitalist society, free market bases, who are basically in the Republican Party. There's some exceptions, of course, but a lot of them are in the Republican Party. When something comes out that threatens that, It doesn't matter what it is, they're against it.
Right.
And so President Reagan was a game changer. He changed the political rules. And American politics has never been the same since. The Republican Party was far different before President Reagan than they were afterwards. And this
Right.
trend towards, let's call it further right, is increased more and more and more since that time with each passing Republican president.
Right. Yeah.
And so
Nixon
because
passed
of
the.
that,
I'm sorry. Nixon passed the EPA, and
yeah,
he was
exactly. He
big.
was very,
Today he would be a super liberal. I mean, he would be with AOC on a number of
exactly.
items. It's
And,
crazy. Yeah.
and so because of this ideology, this group was prone. They weren't climate deniers yet, they were prone. What pushed them over the edge is that big lie from big oil. They were susceptible to this. And there was very few defending against it at the time. So what happens is, if it wasn't for the propaganda campaigns that started with big oil, you and I would not be doing this today. There never would have been climate brawl. The US would have passed legislation a couple of decades ago.
Yeah.
But it's not hard, by the way. This wasn't some brilliant plan on their part. They had just had to repeat the same messages over and over again. Climate denial legislation will cost jobs. It will hurt families.
Right.
You'll
It's
lose your
shameful.
freedom. Look what happens with anti-maskers in the US right now. And people are dying right and left, and it doesn't change anything. Well, imagine how easy it was with climate change. And so what happened was, when we're all said and done, after decades of this propaganda campaign, and I must admit, the Democrats did a crappy job of challenging that view. And that part I've never understood, and something that always bothered me. But they have not done a good job. There are some very good Democrats out there that have fought tooth and nail. There are a
Yeah.
handful of them,
Well,
and they're fairly well known.
I think one of the big problems is you've got a lot of moderate Democrats, in very precarious uh, um, voting districts, and a lot of them are just afraid to make any waves, and they'll do the safe thing, and they'll sometimes vote with conservatives. That's changed over the last few years since Trump, but prior to Trump, a lot of the moderates, probably tried to deny climate change at first, or at least some of the moderates in the unsafe districts. So I think that was a big problem. Just kind of the moderate Dems, getting them along because they just want to play things safe.
Well, the other thing too is that they didn't have to become climate deniers. All they had to do was shut up.
Yeah. Well, exactly. Yes.
And
Right.
so they were quiet.
Right.
And you're absolutely right. And the problem is, I can say this all I want, and I realize there's a realistic scenario here. It's not a job of a politician to get reelected. It's a job of a politician to do what's right for his constituents. And
Yeah.
unfortunately, there are times that what's doing right for your constituents is not what they think is right for them.
Right.
Now, that's a little bit
It,
of a dangerous,
no,
slopey ground to get into.
it's very
If you
tricky.
ever,
It's very tricky, though. I mean, you do have to get reelected. I was a city councilor, and I had to be careful about what I did. So, for example, one of the projects I'll talk about, or I might as well just come out with it now. I did a blog against Tony Heller, the climate change denier, who you are familiar with. In fact, I saw you going around with him today. So I created this blog, and I had to do it anonymously because I was involved with city politics. And I was afraid if I did this blog, other people would find out about it because, who knows what these kooks are going to do. They're going to find out who I am, and then they're going to go on the Facebook page and say, look at what this guy is doing. This is your city councilor. And of course, I dropped F-bombs on the blog. It was a parody of Tony Heller. So I didn't want that, circulating out there in the public. So I had to, do that anonymously. I had to be quiet. I couldn't talk openly about climate change, or I couldn't, acknowledge that that was my blog. So it's tough. I mean, you do have political reality to factor in, and you got to make sure that you get elected. So in a way, I don't blame the moderates, is what I'm saying.
I understand that too. And, especially in the age of social media. Character assassination is rampant out there. I would say I would get at least a dozen of the most nasty attacks in the world, innuendos, and they just repeat nasty memes that have been photoshopped to make me
I
look
know.
at some
Yeah, no, I got
horrible person,
I
and
got
that's
that as
okay.
city councilor. Yeah,
See, I'm lucky because when I look at that now, I can say, I got him. Okay, so yeah, you just keep on throwing that at me because I got you now, because now you're showing what a jerk you are. But if you're a politician, you can't do that. You
right.
know, but you have to, there is a time that for certain issues, you have to rise above that. And
Well, this is one of them for sure. Yeah,
it's tough. There, and I'm not saying you should just jump off the cliff, but you have to push the envelope. And
exactly.
so,
I use that same exact phrase. I mean, a good politician obviously he has to protect his interests, has to get reelected within reason, of course. I mean, you shouldn't be required to do anything unethical to get reelected, like many of the Republicans are with their support for Trump. But yeah, at the same time, you try to push the envelope as much as possible. I think. I mean, I think that's the absolute key. Find out where you can, move things forward without risking too much your own seat.
yeah, exactly. And if you look at it right now, the most famous case in the United States right now is Senator Manchin.
Right.
That he's a Republican or a Democrat is hard to understand, but he's in a coal-rich state.
Right.
I can tell you, if he does what he does simply to get reelected, then he's a crappy politician.
Right. Yeah. No question. A crappy person. For sure. Yeah, it's just truly bizarre. I just can't get in the head of someone like that. If I were his age, I'd be like, screw it. I got to do the right thing here. I mean, why is he grasping on to these last few years of power is just beyond me. It just strikes me as someone grossly unethical. Or maybe
Well,
on the other hand, he could be just very ignorant about the problem. I don't know. I don't know.
uh, 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 from a Canadian's point of view, a severe problem of American politics is the ability of corporations to donate anything they want to a
Oh
political
yeah.
party.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
We have very strict regulations in Canada. We still get problems of that happening sometime. But when you have an open purse string, you talk about, well, politicians have to do what they to get reelected. Well, someone giving you $1 million to your campaign is what some of these people need to get reelected. And of
Right.
course, no one's a fool. You don't get this money for not doing anything. You have to pay them back.
Right.
And the oil industry and big corporate America is so famous for doing this constantly.
Yep. Well, Ted
In
Kennedy,
any
just
other,
before he died, warned that money was going to kill democracy. And then, of course, we had that awful decision in 2011, Citizens United, and that just opened the floodgates even more.
yeah,
And
exactly.
but anyway, where's the good news? We'll get there somehow. All right. Let's see. So we covered the climate brawl tag, talked about U.S. politics, which, by the way, you know more about U.S. politics than I do, which is embarrassing. But I want to talk about Canadian politics too, and figure out. So you mentioned a lot less money in politics, and just from a distance, I don't follow Canadian politics that closely. I know the prime minister, prime minister, right, not president, uh, Trudeau, and I see like almost a perfect mirror of what's going on in the United States there in Canada. There's lots of similar things going on, lots of similar political dynamics. So we should watch this video, by the way. I sent you a link to it on Twitter. It's a, YouTube video from Dr. Jordan Peterson,
Oh boy.
who, yeah, he's out there, as you'll see in this video. But he is knocking Pierre Trudeau, and we'll take a look at it. Let me get switched over to that. Give me a second here. Pull that up. Use this as kind of a starting point. Hold on. Dun, 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 dun. There we go. All right, so here is Dr. Jordan Peterson. Now, this is a weird video, as you're going to see here in a second.
Now they're planning the crime of the century.
This is like Jordan Peterson poetry hour, slam poetry. It's really weird.
He's quite religious in this.
He is.
Just as globally we've agreed to a minimum corporate tax, we must work together to ensure it is no longer free to pollute anywhere in the world. That means establishing a shared minimum standard for pricing pollution. Of course, what's even better than pricing emissions is ensuring that they don't happen in the first place. Which brings me to my next major commitment. We'll cap oil and gas sector emissions today and ensure they decrease tomorrow at a pace and scale needed to reach net zero by 2050. That's no small task for a major oil and gas producing country. It's a big step that's absolutely necessary.
All right. Now, do you see anything wrong with that?
No, I don't, actually.
All right. So now let's see what Jordan Peterson says about that pretty accurate statement. Let's see how he refutes it.
The actor. I see an actor, a simulacrum of the real thing, an appearance on the world's stage. Tell me, Mr. Trudeau, are the unsophisticated rednecks of Alberta not setting to rise in anger against the damned pea soupers of Quebec? What exactly are you doing in Glasgow? Saving the world? Are not our flags at half-mast? You have a country to run. Get home. Make peace. Do your job. God help me if my vision in this regard is clouded by my own presumption. But I see an actor, not a real boy.
For those who don't know, so Jordan Peterson has this fixation on Pinocchio. And so the little boy he's talking about is the wooden doll Pinocchio. You'll see more of that here in a second. That's the end. But now he does a slideshow, which is just weird. Like, where he's showing screen captures from the Disney movie Pinocchio. And I guess his point is that Trudeau is a liar. But, you know, there's obviously nothing of substance in anything that Peterson said. You know, it was the same kind of stuff that we see here in the United States. You know, tax on, you know, he's against the regular working people in Alberta. And of course, you got this finely dressed man, really good looking man. And so he's, you know, basically calling him out as an elite, which we see that in the United States as well. So is, you know, what Jordan Peterson is doing here, is that also representative of what's going on in Canadian politics as well? Do you see that exact kind of thing going on?
There's many aspects of Canadian politics that are almost U.S. light.
U.S. light, interesting, yeah.
Okay, our Conservative Party is trying to become the Republican Party light. We're seeing this more and more.
So does it fly? Is it working?
It's working more than I feel comfortable with, let's put it that way. What people like Peterson are doing, and a lot of other, we have some high profile climate deniers in Canada, just like anyone else does. He's actually not one of the he's one of the more famous ones as a person overall. He's a long-standing professor at University of Toronto, where I got my degree from. He's quite outspoken. He's written many books, so he's quite well known. but he only
Right.
dabbles once in a while in the climate denial crowd. He's not one of the guys that tweets 10 times a day about it. But what these high profile guys are trying to do is trying to divide a wedge between Alberta and the rest of Canada more than already exists. In Canada, the economy of Alberta, the oil and gas industry is very important. It has been for a long period of time. So much so that Canadian economy has been called one of the petro countries now because of the oil sands that we have there. But we have a problem in Canada with our oil and gas. A lot of our oil comes from the oil sands.
Right.
And the problem with the oil sands is it's difficult to get the oil out of the oil sands. And because of that, Alberta has one of the largest per capita GHG emissions in the entire world. And that has nothing to do with the consumption of fossil fuels. It has to do with the processing of the fossil fuels.
Yeah.
And so when Prime Minister Trudeau, and he mentioned this during the election campaign as well. So the electorate knew this when he got voted back in the last election, that he would be putting a cap on the GHG emissions from Alberta, from the oil sands. We have to do that, or Canada's going to have no chance whatsoever of ever reducing our GHG emissions. The Alberta government has fought tooth and nail to make sure it just expands. And we have a terrible denial government in Alberta, just as bad as anyone you have in Texas or Florida or anywhere else in the United States.
Well, that was one of my questions. It's my sense, as a casual observer, that Alberta seems to be getting radicalized. I see a lot of the deniers that you combat with, they're from Alberta, and Alberta, is not heavily populated. I mean, do you get the sense that this whole fight is helping to radicalize the people? I mean, are the oil interests actively propagandizing the people in Alberta to ensure they get favorable legislation passed? I mean, that's what I think, but I just have no idea if that's grounded in reality. I mean, what would you say to that?
Just a little bit of a background. I lived in Calgary for a couple of years.
Okay.
It's a beautiful city. It's a beautiful province.
Yeah.
It's a great place. Certainly, the oil and gas industry is important, but Alberta is far more than oil and gas. But the groups that are trying to radicalize, as you're saying, the Jordan Petersons of the world, they try to make it sound like Alberta can't exist without oil and gas. That's ludicrous. Alberta is much more than that. And so the whole idea, if you look at the Jason Kenney government, who's what we call premiers here, is to say, look at what this evil prime minister is doing. Look what the evil eco-activists are doing. They're trying to destroy our province by taking away our oil and gas industry. Now, keep in mind that Canada ratified and signed the Rio Agreement in 1992. That's when the countries of the world agreed that they were going to do something about greenhouse gases. So what has Alberta done in almost 30 years since then? They have ratcheted up their oil sands production and ratcheted up nonstop as quickly as they could.
Yeah.
Now suddenly they are getting upset that the world is finally putting pressure on them to stop.
When did the oil sands or tar sands project get started? About what year?
Well, the oil sands actually have an interesting development that entrepreneurs have been, like the oil sands have been known for a long period of time, but no one knew how to get the oil out.
Mm-hmm.
And so there are very entrepreneurial enterprises that go right back to the beginning of the 20th century. But it's not until Syncrude and Suncor built major facilities, I forget the year, I think it was in the early 60s, that this became a truly industrial complex.
Oh, that far
What's
back.
interesting is that most people don't know this. When the oil sands first started up, I think it was called the Petroleum Club or the Calgary Petroleum Club, wouldn't allow them in because they were considered miners, not true oil people. because they were digging this sand out of the ground and they weren't pumping gushers as they had. So that's changed since. Now the oil sands are the largest. But that's how the oil sands got started. But really to be a major factor in the more Canadian economy, it probably didn't start till, well, maybe even the beginning of the millennium, maybe a little bit earlier than that.
Are there any other oil production sectors in Canada? Any major ones? I mean, do you have like drilling in the Arctic like the United States?
I don't think we have anything in the Arctic. We have a few offshore in Newfoundland. Certainly some of the oil sands go into Saskatchewan. There's some ordinary oil production in Alberta as well, besides the oil sands. But certainly Alberta dominates that sector overall. Now, people have been trying to work with the Alberta government to start to do something about the oil sands for a long period of time. And there was no discussion. They just refused. And so it reaches a point, and here you're talking about, and this is an awkward situation. Nobody wants to alienate Alberta and Canada, or any province for that matter. Well, the only people that want to do that are people like Peterson that threw out these insulting comments. They're just going to radicalize people as they're going along. So every Canadian wants help, and no one wants to punish Alberta. This is not about punishing anybody. And I've always maintained, take example of Alberta, and let's say someone says, okay, I'm going to phase out the oil sands in 10 years. Okay, I'm just picking that off the top of my head. No one's saying that. I wish they would. Who's supposed to pay for that? Are all those guys, or thousands of people are going to lose their jobs? Are they supposed to be punished for that? No. This becomes a Canadian problem. And no worker can be left behind. And these people have to be taken care of. And so there is ways of making sure that people are not punished when our legislation with good intention is passed for the betterment of all, without some poor guys having to suffer more than anyone else.
Right.
And that's not hard to do, and that's what has to be done.
Yeah, that is. It's very easy for the oil companies to leverage those workers, scare those workers. Are there any programs that Trudeau or anybody's trying to get in place? There's like a jobs program, or maybe some kind of huge safety net to ensure that those workers aren't punished?
I'm not sure exactly. I think there's been talk of it, but certainly my personal feeling has looked at this for a long period of time. The two have to go hand in hand. So if tomorrow someone puts a hard cap on reducing oil sands or whatever the case may be, it has to go, and we're not talking about simple retraining programs. If I'm a 50-year-old worker in the oil sands, I don't think a retraining program is going to do me a lot of good.
Yeah.
And in today's marketplace, people could be out of work for a long period of time. So there has to be a safety net.
How many jobs are we looking at from the tar sands?
I forget how many thousands of jobs are involved. It's also
spin-off economy from
oil
those jobs.
Is a roller coaster, eh? We've seen it in Alberta, where the oil industry has been going so strong that they actually flew jumbo jets of workers from Newfoundland to Alberta because there was such a shortage of labor. At the same time, there was larger unemployment in Newfoundland.
This was
And
recently?
then other times we're almost all laid off because the industry has gone down to a low point.
That was recently they flew in the workers?
Within the last few years.
Yeah.
Things have slowed down again, and so everyone was out of work. The oil industry is a tough one to work in because either you're making real good money and you're doing really, really well, or you're making almost nothing.
Right.
And this is the way the oil industry has always gone. It's a very cyclic industry.
What, maybe you can help shed some light on this. So we know about the Keystone Pipeline. I've heard of it, but I don't quite understand why it needed to be built, because isn't there already a pipeline that goes down to like, I don't know if it's Oklahoma or, near Texas. I think it stops, and then maybe it goes down to the Mississippi River. I'm not sure. But so why did they need that extra leg that eventually got stopped?
I'm not familiar with all the pipeline details.
Yeah.
I just gave up on that a long time ago. Certainly, it was a very controversial issue about what was happening, and with the president saying, yes, it was okay, and another president saying it's not okay, and another president saying it's maybe okay. Pipelines itself overall are another controversial area when we're talking about oil and gas. A big one in Canada, for example, is Eastern Canada has a large demand for oil and gas. A lot of the oil in Eastern Canada comes from offshore. It doesn't come from Alberta. We have no economic way of getting out here. So someone says, well, why don't you build a pipeline? And then you start going down a toilet bowl effect where you start getting to arguments pro and against, and it can just get lost in what's happening. You know, if you're going to get rid of your oil in 10, 20 years, what's the point of building a pipeline that you want to last for 50 years, wherever the case may be? So it becomes a quagmire when you get into it, when you start talking about the pipelines. Most activists, with good reason, are dead against pipelines of any sort because it's an enabler of the use of oil and gas. Why do you want any enabler of something that's going to encourage GHG emissions? The argument against that is, well, wait a minute, you're using the oil and gas anyway. Shouldn't it be Canadian oil and gas you're using instead of from Saudi Arabia? Mm-hmm. And the same argument's been used for the US, by the way. You know, they'll say, US, why do you want to buy oil from Saudi Arabia when you can buy it from Canada? You have a lot better assured supply coming from us than you would coming from a hotspot like the Persian Gulf.
Gotcha. All right. Let's mix it up a little bit more. Let's go back to what's going on Twitter. We'll take a look at some of your tweets. And maybe you can kind of walk us through what some of your strategies are with these tweets. So you sent me some. Let me pull those up and get right to that here. Yeah, I always wondered why people need a producer for these kind of podcasts, but I can see the reason because there's just a lot of details here. So I apologize for the awkward delay in pulling this up. 1 second. All right, now I got to switch over to Twitter. So we'll do that. All right, so there you are in all your glory in Twitter. All right, so there's your Climate Brawl tag. Now, I notice these other tags, those are relatively new. Have you been using those fairly regularly? Climate Crisis?
They're not mine. They're very popular in Twitter. Hashtags are a little bit magical on Twitter. Twitter gives you some guidelines, but really what's the purpose of a hashtag? There's like 150 million people on Twitter. I don't see 150 million. And so how do you communicate with people? Well, your followers will see your tweets, but some people follow hashtags. So if I'm interested in the climate crisis, I'll follow the climate, might know nothing about me. So to reach out to them by using the hashtag, it's just another way of reaching out to them.
It's funny, I actually met the guy who created the hashtag. His name was Chris Messina. When Twitter was brand new, he was on it, and I had met him like about 2 years previously. He worked on the same kind of software, and we met at some meeting in Boston. So anyway, Chris Messina is the inventor of the hashtag, and I got to meet him. Yeah, I mean, the hashtag seemed to be really big when Twitter first took off, and it kind of dwindled. But your hashtag leveraged it beautifully, and it really kind of really took off more than any other hashtag. Like, I don't regularly see hashtags used except for maybe very short-term little buzzy kind of topics that are going on. But Climate Brawl really is the only hashtag that I could tell you that is regularly used. So that's pretty cool. Oh, and we were talking about the number of followers. You were going to talk about how you acquired those followers, right? And I got a story for that too, but you go first. We'll come back.
Let me quickly give you that story.
What should I click?
Again,
what should I click?
No, don't click anything.
Okay.
What I'll do is I'll just give you a little story about the followers part.
Oh, gotcha. Okay.
For my regular Twitter feed, when I was just doing science and stuff like that, I got up to 2,000 or 3,000 followers, which isn't bad for an old guy that doesn't know what he's doing.
Yeah, that's really good.
My son, who is very good on Twitter. He used to be one of the top uh, people who are on Twitter in Ottawa, for example. He has well over 100,000 followers.
Oh, wow. So what
He kept on
what were
saying,
some of his tips that worked?
oh, well, the one thing he kept on telling me is just don't retweet articles. Tell people what you think. And when the first time he told me that, I said, why would I do that? No one cares what I think.
Yeah.
I'm nobody here. And he kept on telling me, and he finally, it's just like everything else, he said, okay, I'll try it.
Yeah.
So normally I'd send it a tweet, and a good tweet, I might get 10, 20 likes.
Yeah.
But then I'll make some stupid comments. It's just me talking. It's just like you and I chatting right now.
Now, you don't even have a blue check, right?
Oh, no.
So this is
the
all
way
done.
I tweet, I'm never going to get a blue check.
Yeah.
They have very strict rules on who they give blue checks to. And one of the things is you cannot badger people.
You can't badger people. They classify you as someone who badgers people. Really?
Well, I'm just classifying myself as that. It doesn't mean that the person's right or wrong.
Yeah.
But the way I attack climate deniers, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe someday they will, but I don't see that.
Have you ever applied for a blue check?
Yeah, I had a couple of times.
You did?
It hasn't worked out.
Huh. That's really, I mean, you got 2 books now. You've been in all kinds of publications. That's insane. Wow.
But going back to the followers,
Yeah.
that's when my followers started to increase. And so the more I started just giving comments, I still, by the way, retweet important articles or important graphs and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
But the greatest interactions and usually the greatest response to Twitter are from when I just make comments. And hopefully,
Comments, huh? Interesting.
no, that doesn't happen with every comment, but it's weird. I'll have the most brilliant Twitter tweet in the history of the world, and I will carefully send it out, and 5 people like it.
Right.
And there'll be another time saying, I'm just ready to close down for bed. I'll just send it off, and I'll wake up in the morning, there's 200 likes to it. So I still haven't figured out yet what the secret is between the two, but you never know what's going to be successful.
Well, I got my own little, I think if you put a typo in your tweet, I think it actually goes more viral for whatever reason. I'll look at it and there's a typo. I'm like, oh my God. But I think it makes you seem more real or something. I don't know, but tweets with typos seem to go more viral. But now, about a year ago, do you remember there was a guy who went on a hunger strike for you? To get you to 20,000 tweets. Do you recall that at all?
Oh, yeah.
Well, that was me. I was Tony Heller at the time with using that Tony Heller exposed account.
Thank you for that.
I got booted off of Twitter with that account eventually.
Well, I can tell you, and this is true. I have developed some true virtual friendships over Twitter.
Yeah,
and there's more than 1 or 2 of them. It's a strange thing to say with the, on Twitter that you can do that. But there are some people out there that I can truly say that, and I've never met them directly. Very few of them I've had direct conversations like you and I are having today. But I truly consider them to be my friends. We support each other. They're always giving, encouraging comments as things go along.
Yep.
And especially in the Twitter world that I exist in, those comments mean a lot. When you're sitting there on Twitter and you're barraging Tony Heller or whoever you're going after, it can be pretty hard at times, especially when some of the toxic tweets from their followers jump in. And then someone will come you'll say, I really appreciate what you're doing. Thank you. I can tell you that is really important to me. It means a lot.
For me, it's like a support network just to see other people who also think the world is going insane, So I don't feel so alone and isolated. I can see other people who, say the same kinds of thing as I do, have the same kind of thoughts. And it just, it's nice to know that I'm not isolated alone. It's not me against the world. And there's other people all chipping in to try to push rational thinking into politics and into all these kinds of issues like climate change. So, and of course, getting good, timely news is always fascinating to be able to do and hear stories right from the horse's mouth. Like so Michael Mann can give kind of his take on what's going on with the COP conference, which I understand was a bit of a dust up. Maybe you know more about this than I do. I only got like bits and pieces, but he seems to be concerned that there's too much, and he used this word pissing on the COP process. Do you know specifically what he was referring to there?
There's COP conferences can't win.
Mhm.
Okay, it doesn't matter what happens at a COP conference. You're going to have people that hate them for it. There'll be a few people that might like them for it, and there's a large group in between.
Mhm.
We briefly talked about people, I don't think, appreciate what a COP conference really can do. All it can do is nudge world leaders to do something. And the success of a COP conference is whether the nudge, how strong that nudge is.
And
There's nothing else a COP conference can do.
who's doing the nudging? I mean, we obviously know about Greta Thunberg, but who on the inside is doing the nudging? Is it the scientists?
No, not. There would be outside support, like I'm sure Dr. Mann was supporting it and a few of the other high-profile climate scientists. The IPCC was trying to pick up some of it, but it's really the executive of the UNFCCC that is out there, and they're trying to twist arms, but they really can't twist political arms very much. The media is trying to put pressure on political leaders to do stuff. And so, I don't know. I don't want to be too hard on COP. They never do enough, but there's only so much they can really do as things go along. COP is only as good as the world leaders that are there. And certainly there's sometimes better leadership within the UNFCCC than at other times. But generally, I think these people are sincere and they do try their best to try to move these leaders forward.
So do you think, I think in Glasgow, I saw a photo of a pretty large protest in Glasgow. Do you think that has an effect on these world leaders? I mean, does that weigh in the back of their minds at all? Or are they just strictly worried about, their own interests and their people?
It's a good question. What is the right way? What is the wrong way to promote action on climate change? And let's say we're staying generally within the law. Okay, not violent protests. It's okay if you block a street for a little while or something like that.
Yeah.
And I don't judge people on that. What I think is best, I do it. What you think is best, you should do it as well. The important point is you should do something. And so if you look at the XR Rebellion, XR group, what they're trying to do, what Greta Thunberg is doing with the Fridays for Future and the climate strikes, I'm not passing judgment on that. I get people attacking me who claim to be hardline activists. And these guys are zealots.
Yeah.
I'll get attacked, and I don't mean to pick on the vegan crowd, but there are people within that group is that if you're not a vegan, you're the scum of the earth. And they will attack an oil person, or they'll attack myself or anybody else as it goes on.
Right.
And my point is that, do you really think you're helping the movement by attacking me? I have no problem what you're doing. Go ahead and be your vegan and say, yes, this is an important thing we should do. But don't criticize other people who are trying to do the right thing as well, because that's what the oil industry wants. And I'm always scared that when you're talking about what I call these zealots, and the other group that falls into that, we talked about it a little bit before, were the doomists, saying, there's no hope. We're all doomed. We're never going to get this done.
Yeah. Well, hold on, Gerald. We got our first chatter. Vampire Hunter D. He says that's called extremism. He's talking about, what the vegans that you ran into were doing to you. He says violence will be met equally. Well, I'm not sure what he means by that. Let's hope this does not turn violent, because that would not be a positive
Yeah, and these people generally they don't threaten with physical violence. With all my
Right.
Twitter interactions, by the way, I have had a couple that made some smart ass remarks about it,
Yeah.
but we're not there for something like that. But the whole purpose of when these extremists or zealots, as I talk about them, what they do is they cause dissension within the ranks within the climate activist movement. So we start arguing with each other. The doomists are saying, well, we shouldn't, we're not going to do anything. Both of them have a common outcome. The oil and gas industry wins.
Right. Exactly.
And so some of these people are really believing what they're doing. I truly believe some of them have been planted by the oil and gas industry, certainly just to cause that dissension.
Yeah. No, that makes me angry. And I mean, I get really pissed off. There's this one journalist, Eric, can't think of his name, not Hassfelder, something like that. But anyway, he regularly launch grenades at Michael Mann and talk about, oh, why aren't you letting women speak? Why are you basically hogging the microphone and this and that? Are you out of your mind? I mean, clearly Michael Mann is not a sexist. He's, I don't know his exact politics, but he's clearly on the right side of the political spectrum as far as treating women with respect. And, he clearly believes that women are equals. I mean, there's just no question about it. So for this guy to start attacking Michael Mann just pissed me off to no end. What are you going to gain by that? It's insanity. And, and I get the people that, they're all about, social justice, and so am I. But you don't eat your own. That's just why, when there's these oil and gas interests that are the true enemy, would you direct any energy whatsoever at someone who is trying to work with you and accomplish the same exact thing? It just makes absolutely no sense,
Well, that's it exactly. And if you're an executive with Exxon, you're just laughing all the way to the bank when you see that happening.
Right.
This is the best thing that could happen to you that's out there. That within supposedly, there's two people both fighting for the same cause, or that one's attacking the other's throat.
Right.
And again, there's not a lot of them out there. They go in spurts. But again, I think they're just as harmful to the overall cause than there is for the propaganda from the oil and gas industry itself.
Yeah.
It serves no purpose except to let oil and gas just needs excuses to keep on doing what it's doing.
Right.
And it's going to drag this out forever.
Yes. Yeah. No, it's the old trick, divide and conquer.
Yeah,
That's exactly right. Yeah, I will say that I haven't seen quite so much of that infighting as I did maybe a year or two ago. I think people kind of got the message that, you don't eat your own. So
when I see it, I'll challenge them the same way I challenge any climate denier.
Yeah, exactly. I do the
I see
same.
no difference between the two whatsoever.
Right, exactly.
And that they can claim all they want. And I find it strange because I do see it in spurts. And that makes me think that it's been organized and pushed by someone on the outside. The same thing you see with so-called bots. I don't see many bots on my Twitter feed, but I do see them every once in a while. I think I do anyway. And it's always
Twitter's
associated with
done a good job
something.
of cleaning it up. Yeah. I'm sorry. It's always what?
It's always associated with a major event or something like that.
Right. Yeah, that's what Michael Mann was saying about a week ago. There's been an uptick in bots and that kind of thing.
And when you look at bots or just dedicated trolls, they both sound the same, by the way.
Yeah.
There's not a hell of a lot of difference between them. And frankly, from a practical point of view, there's not much difference between them either.
Right. All right, let me, I'm going to do a final push here, see if we can get some people back in. I had noticed that I forgot to hit the YouTube button to go live. So it wasn't until about 5 minutes into the video that we went live. So some people may have come and then left. And apologize. Again, it's the first time I've done this. So
No problem at all. We're having a fun chat anyway.
Well, that's the thing too. We'll be able to take this video and chop it up into different segments and, put those out there and help relay what you said. I mean, that's the nice thing about YouTube is that you can, you've got a permanent record of everything that we said, so you don't necessarily have to see it live. But let me do a final push here. So if anybody wants to ask a question, I'll tweet out. And actually, it'd be much better if you can retweet it, because you obviously have a much bigger following than I do. I'm like stuck at like 250, Jerry. I need some tips, man. I need some tips.
It's not magical. It just happens with time. Just keep on tweeting.
I'm too combative, but that's my style. That's kind of my personality. I don't know if you can call it an art form, but that's how I express myself. I feel like I got to express my frustration because I am very frustrated with the state of the world beyond belief. All right. Let me switch up this tweet here. So let's do it. I'd like to invite you to. All right. So last call.
I'm just looking at my Twitter feed too. I'll see what I can do.
Or questions for at Gerald Kutney, the originator of the channel, climate hashtag. We'll stick around for like another 15 minutes or so. See if we can suck anybody in here. What we should really tweet is to some denier, say something to it, and have them fly in here, and we could have a live stream climate brawl. That would be fun.
Now you're being nasty to me.
Huh? That would be a cool thing to do. We both get on Twitter and we, live stream our tweets. People get into really weird stuff. I don't quite understand it. Like I'll go on Twitch. I'm just kind of exploring this, live streaming stuff, and people will just show up, and all I'm doing is just puttering around on the computer, not really doing anything, and they'll show up and just start chatting and talking, and people will watch me. And I'll just blather on about whatever, and they'll just engage. And Twitch is great because there's a lot of younger people on Twitch. And obviously, those are the types of people you can reach. But for me, I think it's just a numbers game, a sales game, where the more you can get into the heads of people, the more you're talking about it, the more that, if you hear about climate change 2 times a day compared to whether you heard about it 20 times a day, it's going to make a much bigger impression. And that's why, people like Catherine Hayhoe, they tell us that the best way to address climate change is to talk about it. And so that's what I'm trying to do here is to, even if I hit maybe only 10, 15 people, well, that's more than I would have otherwise. Plus I get to talk to great people like you and, see what your sense is and bounce ideas off of you. So, and people will learn, they'll watch this. And again, it's just, I'm only one person. I may lower global temperatures by, 1 billionth of a degree, by 2060 through my efforts. But if everybody does that little 1 billionth of a degree, if 1 billion of us do that, then we've reduced temperature by, a total 1 degree Celsius, which is nothing to sneeze at. And, for me, it all comes back to what Gandhi said, which is, everything you do is going to be unimportant, but it's important that you do it, right? Because, at the end of the day, we're all pretty insignificant. This giant universe, we're all going to be poof gone in a few years. But still, you got to understand that you do have a role in the universe. You can impact it. And every little thing that you do is helpful, and it makes you feel good instead of just sitting and stewing and doing nothing, So
that's very important. And when you to handle the climate crisis, politicians and corporations have to come to the table. Without them, we can't do it. So what can an individual do? What can one person do? As you said, we can do quite a bit.
Right.
The idea is that there's 7.8 billion of us. So if a good portion of that do something, I think the world will take notice of what's happening. So it's not that we have no power.
Right.
Again, we can't do it by ourselves because corporations and politicians have to make this work.
Right.
And what you're really trying to do is you're trying to get a momentum. Oh, this isn't necessary. There's no more need for it. It just becomes a way of life. It becomes corporate rules that we have to start doing things better. And that will happen. But until it does, it needs to be pushed. It needs to be pushed by the COP process. It needs to be pushed by politicians through legislation.
Right.
And it's got to be sooner than later.
Yeah, and I always say you got to be as rabid as the deniers. And that's what I love about people like you. You are rabid, you know, and you're still polite. Now, it's one thing we should talk about. You know, you say it's important to be civil, which I think by and large you should be. However, I would also say if someone's an asshole, they're fair game. You have every right to call them every name in the book without getting banned on Twitter. You know, that's my personal approach. And like you said, we've all got our own little approaches and styles. I'm never going to be Catherine Hayhoe, you know. She's just way too nice. I would come across really phony, but she's a genuine person, you know, and she does phenomenal work because that's her style. And really, that would be my message is, you know, find your own style. Like you said, you know, you've got your own style. Everyone's got their own little way, and you're going to reach a different audience than I'm going to reach, and Catherine's going to reach a different audience. But as long as everybody is doing something, we're going to reach a very wide audience, you know. Well, who have you seen whose work have you seen? Let's leave the scientists out of it because we've already kind of talked about them. But is there anybody that you've seen who you say, oh my God, they're doing really great work with climate change? And, you know, we all know about Greta Thunberg and some of the more popular ones, but are there others that are out there that people may not have heard about that you like to watch and follow?
In Twitter, there's a lot. The problem is it becomes the Twitter handles and the avatars that people use. It starts becoming a blur after a while. You know, as soon as I see their tweet, I'll think, oh yeah, it's good to hear from that person again. They're always doing a good job.
Yeah.
In my book, I try to actually name some of the people that you just mentioned that mostly no one would ever heard of before. Within my Twitter feed, I would say there's dozens of them. I can't rhyme off any names that come. And in fairness, if I did, I would forget the ones that should be mentioned as well. The one thing I did do is I haven't done this before. I put together a list for Climate Brawl. It's the only list I have in my Twitter feed. I think there's about 320 people on there right now. And I've put together over the past several months. And I think the people on that list are special people. And
are these people that use the tag?
Pardon me?
Are these people that use the tag? Is that why they're on the list?
Some of them do. Some of them I see them challenging. If you open up my lists on Twitter.
Yep.
That's it. Okay, and then
right there, climate.
No, that's not the one.
I'm sorry, that's my Twitter feed. Let me get to yours. Here we go. All right, you got Canadian Greens.
Oh, hang on.
Right there.
Okay, Friends of Climate Brawl. That's
Friends
the
of
one.
Climate Brawl.
Yeah, click on that.
Let me add that. I don't use lists much on Twitter. Never really got into them. So I can click on follow. Now, what does that mean? Everyone, because I'm following this list, when anyone on this list tweets, I'll be alerted. Is that basically it?
I'm actually not quite sure.
Yeah, really.
But if you looked at the members, there are 313, and you don't have to click on the members because otherwise you're just seeing their tweets. Now go back up.
Oh, sorry. Okay, go where?
Click on members. 313. There's members. 313. Yep. Okay, click on that. Okay, these are the people that generally I've.
All right, good to know. Well, you know, one thing that has always frustrated me. So, like the right-wing kooks, they will see, you know, that you're a patriot or you got the American flag in your handle. They will immediately follow you, no questions asked, and they're really good at sticking together. We don't do that. I mean, it's not an automatic, and I am definitely to blame on that too. I'm the same kind of way. For whatever reason, we're maybe because we're skeptical and we're not really sure if that person's legit or, you know, whatever weird stuff is going on, we won't automatically follow that person, which I think is a shame. And I got to step up my game and really start to do better to follow. But does that did you get that sense as well, that we're not quite so quick to support each other?
Yeah, well, the one thing too is that I have a lot of climate deniers that follow me. There's at least a few dozen of them.
Yeah.
And they're following me all the time, and then they'll complain about my tweets, and I'll say, well, if you don't like my tweets, stop following me.
Right. So they're just looking for you to trip up so that they can report you or something like that?
And they're looking for any, I can attack them on this. So they'll send out some nasty comment about it.
Gotcha.
So I try to keep this list up.
Oh, there I am.
There's a handsome face there.
Yeah. Yeah, nice. So you regularly maintain this?
Yeah, again, I put it together a couple of months ago, and it's fairly up to date. Pardon me. I try to be a little bit more. Some people say, "Gee whiz, would you mind putting me on the list?" Now, I'll quickly glance through Twitter feed. Sure, like this isn't some strict guidelines that you have to pass a test to get on the list.
Yeah.
I'm just looking for people that I think are making an effort, sort of the people that you decided within what they feel comfortable doing. This is what they do. They may be sharing scientific information. There's a few scientists on here. There's a few people that don't have a clue about science, and there's everyone in between. But they're all contributing in their own way, and that's what's important.
So if someone comes up to you and says, "Hey, Gerald, I'm not sure what I can do on climate change. What do you recommend?" Would one of your tips be to get on Twitter and engage, or do you see that? I mean, I don't know. I mean, everyone's different, I think. So you probably couldn't really answer such a question like that. But in general, do you think everyone should at least do a little something on Twitter, or what's your general sense? How much time should someone put into Twitter, I guess is what I'm asking.
Well, it is important that you do something. Okay? It doesn't have to be on Twitter. I don't even know how I got here, but I ended up just where I focus all my time.
Yeah.
There's people that do it on Facebook. There's a lot of climate deniers there. There's people that take part in marches for a climate strike. So it is important to do something. But also, you don't have to be aggressive against climate deniers. I feel comfortable with that, but there's a lot of people that aren't. And I can tell you, it's not for the faint of heart. These guys are vicious animals.
Yeah, no.
And I can tell you, at times it can be exhausting.
Yeah.
So the important thing is doing what you feel comfortable with. When early on in the days of Climate Brawl, I let people know that if you feel uncomfortable directly participating against climate deniers, which is fully understandable, just support the people that are. Retweet what they're doing, like what they have, give them a nice comment that you appreciate what they're doing.
Yeah.
Stay out of the fight completely. You're all contributing to it as it goes on. So again, whether you feel comfortable retweeting a graph from Nature magazine or an article from Nature magazine, or you just want to make a comment, or good, bad, or indifferent, but yeah, try to do something. And no, Twitter isn't the end of the world. The one thing I found useful about Twitter, because I can interact with so many different climate deniers at the same time, I really believe that I've seen most arguments that these guys can ever throw out.
Yes, right, yeah.
But those arguments are the same I see in Congress for the hearings. Yeah. It's exactly the same thing.
Yeah.
And so the tools of the trade that you learn from this, you can apply it anywhere. You can apply it in Washington, D.C. You can apply it for a climate strike, anything you want.
Yeah, I recently saw a video from a physicist. She does science education on physics, typically. Her name is Sabine Fetter, something like that. I think she's German. But she had an argument where she was grateful for pseudoscientists and, by corollary, climate deniers, because they would put out these bad scientific arguments, and it would actually, if you put the time into debunking them, it would actually help you become more knowledgeable and learn how to defeat these kinds of arguments. And, in the end, it makes you stronger. It makes you a better thinker and a better debater. And I kind of felt the same way with my nemesis, Tony Heller. Back in 2013, I was trying to figure out what was going on with climate change. I'm Googling around. This fucking Tony Heller guy kept coming up. And why? He's pretty popular. He must be legitimate. It took me a while, maybe a few days or a week or whatever, to finally realize that this guy was just full of it. And then I was wondering, well, why is he full of it? Why is he doing this? Well, this doesn't make sense. How can somebody be so crazy putting out all this bad information? So I had to know. So I started getting sucked in and looking at his arguments and figuring out why that one was bullshit and why that one was bullshit. And I just went down and down. And then, sooner or later, I would see all these same arguments over and over and over. And before you know it, I was pretty knowledgeable about climate change and all these bullshit arguments they were putting up. So in a way, I think it is a good exercise to go and look at what these deniers are saying and then, find out why that argument is BS. And which is really nice, though, is because we now have guys like you, which we didn't have in 2013, constantly refuting them. Someone like me, today, who was like me back in 2013, can now go and see the links that you provide really easily and say, oh, okay, this guy must not be telling the truth because there's all these people refuting him. So, I think I think things are easier today for people on Twitter than it was for me when I was on Twitter in 2013. So
one thing that came
a
out
good
of
thing.
my work and with Climate Brawl and stuff is that, as I mentioned before, to begin with, I used to, retweet a Nature article or data from NASA or the IPCC, which was a standard way of that lots of people that were spending time attacking the climate deniers. And there's nothing really wrong with it. But I found it wasn't working for me anyway.
Mm-hmm.
So I call that the defensive strategy. In other words, the climate denier makes a challenge or they show a graph and you say, oh, well, that's not right. I will defend science with the real science.
Right. Yeah,
we all
did that,
still
right?
the thing to do.
Yeah.
But then I switched to what I call the offensive strategy. I very seldom do that anymore. I'll show a new interesting article, but someone shows a graph or someone makes a claim. I make them defend where they got that information from.
Gotcha, yeah. Put them on their
the tables are
heels.
switched. I'm not defending anything. They have to defend themselves. And the neat thing is they can't. And then they look like fools. And so most of my Twitter attacks are really to discredit the climate deniers and their lies and propaganda.
Gotcha.
No longer to defend science, to say science is right, but to show people how wrong these people are.
Now, in your upcoming book, do you cover these kinds of tips?
What is exactly. The central? I outline how to deal with exactly this sort of thing, and I also have a section, I forget, there's but a dozen of the standard myths that climate deniers throw out. And using my offensive strategy, how do you respond in a tweet? Mm-hmm. It's just meant to be a generic. It's not to cover the world, but to give you an idea of the techniques that are used to do that. And I find it so much easier. You've seen what Tony and I have been going back with, like just for today, for example. I'm not trying to defend the science. I'm trying to attack him for showing BS on of a graph. Where it's so much easier, and that's what's really wrong.
Now, if you were to be able to crawl inside the head of Tony Heller, what would you find? What is psychologically making a guy like this tick? I mean, is he on the take with the oil industry? Is he just unstable? I mean, what is it about him that he's been doing this for years now. And we should probably give some background on Tony Heller. He started off with Anthony Watts, I think maybe around 2010, 2011. He had some articles published. It's been a while since I wrote about Tony, so my memory's a little fuzzy. But anyway, he was so full of shit that Anthony Watts kicked him off of his blog, didn't allow him to post on his What's Up With That blog. And so then Tony Heller struck out on his own, started his own blog, had his Twitter, and now he's got a YouTube channel and so forth. And he's been doing this for, a good 7, 8, 9, 10 years on his own. And so, what keeps him motivated, do you think? And Why is he so obsessive about that? I mean, this guy must live on Twitter, and this must be all he does.
When you look at like people like Tony, and again, we'll call them the high profile climate deniers who are out there. Anthony Watts is another.
Yeah.
I don't know if they get any financing for their work or not.
Yeah.
I wouldn't be surprised, especially earlier on there was.
Yeah.
I'd also be surprised if there's any today. And one of the reasons for that is if that any corporation is giving money for this crap that's coming out, they're just throwing their money away.
Yeah.
Now, we talked about climate denialism before. Ideology has an important role to play. And so most of the people that are in that ideological right-wing framework to begin with, and whatever got them started, I think today is just motivating them today. You know, Tony does have his YouTube videos, which who knows how much longer they'll survive under the new YouTube rules. But the idea is that he makes a few bucks off of that. I don't think he's becoming rich. I'd be surprised if Tony's and the other guys are really motivated by money today. It may have started them off. Even the big think tanks.
So you think it's ideology?
They're having problems surviving. Heartland Institute's been in tough shape. A lot of the other ones have folded.
So you would say
money isn't going to think tanks anymore.
So you would say it's ideology driving this guy. He's just a true believer.
I would say it is now. Something sparked it to begin with that was more than that. I don't think it was simple propaganda either.
Yeah.
But my guess is on the average high-profile climate denier, something sparked them to get going. And the ones that are still surviving today, and there's not a lot of them, by the way. There's a few dozen or two of the real high-profile ones. About half of them or more have blocked me because they couldn't stand up to science and the truth. You know, and by the way, I don't block anybody.
Oh, really?
No,
never blocked anyone.
Ever.
You're kidding me.
And the reason for that is,
don't you get these really annoying people that that's just full of
I'm
nonsense?
looking for them.
Yeah, you won't
And
block.
I don't want. All blocking does is make you blind because they're still there. And so when they're tweeting their toxic tweets, I want to see it and decide whether I'll respond or not. If they have 50 followers, I won't bother responding to them.
Yeah.
If they got 5,000 followers, then they'll hear from me.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think, like you said, we've both seen a big decrease in that kind of blatant denialism. And I think at least on Twitter, overall, we're winning the war. Thanks to guys like you and a lot more people out there who are fighting for climate change on Twitter. So that's really heartening because I used to get so angry and upset that no one else was doing it, and I felt like the only guy doing it. Now, of course, I wasn't. Of course, there were other people, but it was a lot more isolating experience just 6-7 years ago compared to today. So that's really good. All right. I'm sorry, Gerald, do you want to give a quick retweet, see if we can get at least one YouTube question in here? And I said, check out my timeline and just retweet me, and we'll see if we can get somebody else in here. Yeah, I figured we get more Twitch people, but I think they mostly come out more at night.
On Twitter, I have 1 or 2 AMAs per year. Ask me anything.
Oh, really?
But I get them sending the questions earlier on too, and if I'll normally get between 25 and 35 questions, but that's where we're leading it for a long period of time.
Gotcha.
Twitter people aren't always onto this sort of thing. You know what I mean?
We all got ADD.
Yeah.
Whatever's happening that second, gotta go follow.
Exactly. And you have to say it in 120 letters or less.
Let's see. All right, let's check out. Let's. I can't see what Tony Heller is saying. I got to go into private mode to see what he's up to. Well, we can go to his blog. He's got the worst looking blog. Let me switch over to browser mode.
But the one thing I'll give Tony credit for, he hasn't blocked me. He blocks lots of people.
Yeah, well, he blocks me, yeah.
But he hasn't blocked me. And a lot of the other climate deniers, high-profile ones, have blocked me. Patrick Moore, and I can't think of all their names.
I haven't
right
heard
now,
much from Patrick Moore lately. I
He's a
assume he's still
Canadian.
out there. He's the guy who touts the fact that he was a founder of Greenpeace, right? That guy?
Yeah.
All right, let's see. All right, let's pick apart one of Tony's blog posts. I mean, look at this. What is Tony thinking here? He's got like 50,000 links in the menu. I mean, who is going to go through that? Look at it. The guy's, he's off his rocker. He is. And who's this person? I keep seeing her all the time. Any idea? Do you visit his blog at all?
No, usually I don't.
No. Not his first rodeo. Yeah, he's moving more into YouTube. I think he did that about 2 years ago.
Yeah, YouTube is his favorite one these days. I'm actually mentioned in one of his YouTube videos.
Oh, are you really? Oh, congratulations.
Yeah, that was a great fame for him. See, this is his latest trick that he does on Twitter. He shows these old newspaper headlines. And
He's been doing that for years. Yeah. Yeah.
Now, this is science to show that climate change doesn't exist.
Right. Yeah, no, that's what, like, one of his old tricks of the trade. He'll dig out these old articles. You know, this one's from 1901. And,
it was a super warm day. So therefore climate change didn't exist because it existed in 1901.
Right. But, you know, if you do not know anything about climate change and you run across this, you'll think, oh, wow, that's interesting. You know?
I can tell you what gets me about Tony is that every time he tweets, he'll get 50 likes within 10, 20 minutes.
Oh, really?
Doesn't matter what he tweets.
Yeah.
You know,
He's got a fan
the world
base.
is a snowball. Oh, I like that one. Yeah, they have no clue what he's saying.
No,
All they know is that when he tweets that they will like it.
Right. Well, I wonder
The other one will try to defend him.
I forget. I took a look recently to see how many followers he has.
It's 55,000. It hasn't moved for a while.
Well, that's what I noticed. He was taken off for like a rocket for quite a while. And then it kind of slowly tapered off. So he's not getting the kind of traction. I think he's tapped out the kind of all the kooks that are out there. Look at this. This is just all old newspaper articles. This guy must be well organized because, you know, he is so prolific. He's just got to spend all of his time, you know, accumulating and curating all these graphs, and he recycles a lot of them too. I just don't know where he finds the energy. It's insane. More news articles. Yeah, more of the same stuff. But he has gotten a lot busier. All right, we'll wrap it up, I think, here. We'll give him another 2 minutes to ask questions. Anything else we should talk over or bring up? And what's on your mind lately these days?
Well, again, I encourage anyone that sees the video to follow me on Twitter at Gerald Kutney. And you really don't know what effect you're having on Twitter. You know, we have our own little lives here, and I certainly hope I'm making a difference. I think everyone, but the important thing is that we're trying.
Right.
And I can't stress that enough. If you're trying, the rest doesn't matter. You know, you're going out there and taking the time. If you like Twitter and you can spend 10 minutes doing it, is fine. I have the luxury, I can spend 10 hours on Twitter and do it. But
right.
But not everyone can do that, or nobody wants to do that. And that's fine as well. So whatever you do is always go out there and try your best. And if you believe that you see something that's wrong on Twitter, whether it's a lie or it's propaganda or wherever it is, don't be quiet about it. Forget about whether it's climate change or anything else. Speak out, because if you don't, nobody else will.
Very well said. I absolutely agree with that. Yeah. Yeah. And thanks again. I mean, it's been great talking with you. I mean, you're an inspiration, and, I love that whole, because it appeals to me, that climate brawl, where you want to fight and you want to punch that other guy and, defeat him and all that kind of stuff. And, the climate brawl isn't going to appeal to everybody. I'm sure you must have had people who said, oh, that's warlike, and we shouldn't be like that. And, like I said, it's going to appeal to everybody. And it's certainly, helped me and supported me and and what I'm trying to do, and you know, to see other people like me doing this kind of thing makes me not feel alone. So I really thank you for doing all this work, and I'm sure you've influenced, you know, hundreds of thousands of other people. And you know, with all the followers you got, it's just really fantastic work. So keep doing it, and we'll definitely have you on again. I mean, there's always stuff to talk about that's going on with climate change. So thank you very, very much for your time. I greatly appreciate it. And we'll see you on Twitter, and we'll brawl together now. All right.
My pleasure, Stephen. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it as well. Have
All
a good
right.
one.
My pleasure. Take care. We'll see you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.